For the people of Europe, or in Latin, populus. We put people first in two ways. First, the purpose of our mission is to contribute to a better future for people on Earth. When we go out, we should have the ones in mind communicating the results. Astronauts show that they acknowledge this trust and value it very high. The connectivity to the social media, which we now see on board of ISS, is a wonderful opportunity to get an instantaneous feedback from Earth about what interests people, what captures their attention, and where there is still information or explanation missing. We see a wide range of content being clicked and absorbed on the ground. Beautiful time-lapse videos of Earth rolling by underneath the ISS cupola, or exciting educational experiments of seemingly hard to illustrate physical phenomena. If you have ever seen water drops dancing in the electrical field of a knitting needle, applying physics yourself becomes a game of fun. We should never neglect the link back to the ones we need as a lobby. Creating this lobby with exciting and convincing results also leads to the advocacy for the things that need to be done in space. Second, Populus serves as a reflection of our respect for the people with whom we work, that we value their opinions, praise their work, and compliment them for their support. As already mentioned above, spaceflight is a team effort. Astronauts used to visit the factories and launch sites not only to become familiar with the hardware, but also to reassure the workers that there is an unbiased trust in their workmanship to make spaceflight as safe as possible. It works both ways. I myself also felt sufficiently assured that all the preparations for the missions and the launch vehicle are done with more than just routine attention. A lot of what we will hear in the next 2 days of this conference explicitly or implicitly deals with the next letter that I would like to introduce, the letter A, which here stands for something between daringness and courage, in Latin, audacia. We acknowledge that spaceflight is a dangerous endeavor. While accepting the risk inherently involved in space travel, we work to minimize this risk whenever we can. Audacia reminds us that the rewards will be unparalleled if we succeed. When this question inevitably comes up in question and answer sessions, I explain in almost the ever same words that yes, we are aware that people have died in spacecraft. And also no, I don't think I am immune against such a thing happening to me, should I again be in a situation to decide whether to go into space. Looking at newer developments with the public advertisement of suborbital flights reaching a crescendo, we have to have a careful look on this aspect as well. For a couple of years now, there have been said to be I think that the ratio of gain versus risk for an individual here still should be larger than 1. Let's see what, after we've received the first reports of incidents of such flights, if the passenger of such flights also share this feeling. But arriving at the brink of space with zero velocity in a suborbital flight, or with orbital speed of more than 26,000 kilometers per hour, makes a whole lot of difference. Especially when you consider that you have to get rid of that energy in the end to come back to Earth. The spaceflight participants, of which many joined the ranks of the Association of Space Explorers, certainly are aware that the more their choice was motivated by a purely personal kick, the less it complies with the audacia that we mean when we say that rewards are ahead of us once we succeed. The more so because this dilemma needs to be thoroughly answered before we set off to Mars. There is no such thing as a one-way trip to Mars. Even for private entrepreneurs, this should be the ultimate taboo line not to be crossed. This is the unspoken contract which is renewed every time astronauts visit factories, integration halls, and launch site pre-flight. Can I trust my life into your hands and professional mastership? Robotic precursor missions are a must, if alone not to leave any means of exploring dangers and risk without risking human lives. Also, building up more experience in the comparatively safe haven of a space station like ISS is mandatory. Here again we arrive at the topic of this conference, identifying synergy links between ISS and Mars. The letter C, Cultura. We continue the exploration started by our ancestors. Conscious of our history and traditions, we expand exploration into space, passing on our cultural heritage for future generations. I agree that all of the things I have said so far can be shared by astronauts coming from all regions of the world, not just Europe. When talking about heritage, however, we Europeans always claim that we always claim that to have a head start for the big innovations, the big openings of new worlds. It goes so far to assume a genetic European imprint for setting out to new frontiers, either revolutionary or evolutionary. Let's describe it with the term curiosity, which also would have fulfilled the letter C, but certainly would have needed more explanation than cultura or culture. Given that it is in our European culture to participate in promising expeditions, undertake new ways of uncovering the unknown, it has been possible to argue that investments into space are fitting well into a common European development strategy. The absence of natural resources in Europe has always been the driving factor to base success on knowledge and innovation. Some of these changes take longer. Examples here are the gradual move from heavy industry to technology-based ones. Some changes emerge quicker, like is the case with the sudden demand for renewable energy and the associated technology. Luckily, many of these promising developments can be easily linked to developments also needed for spaceflight. Additional help came from the Lisbon strategy of 2000, where the leaders of many European nations declared that European societies to be primarily based on knowledge in the future. This goal has been renewed in 2010 by the European Parliament. European culture, whether in universities, all encompassing, in the medieval ages or in the scientific institutions stemming from the 18th and 19th century, has sought to combine research with education of the next generation. A space program that can link to these strong bonds can be more successful. The philosophers of the past searched for the pillars of the world that were supposed to stabilize the known world. Today, with the help of space-based telescope, we can look into the pillars of the universe, like in this marvelous composite slide of a lot of observations from European and other observatories. This is the M16 region in different spectral colors, resolution and detail, and these are commonly known as the pillars of the universe. Europe has become a spacefaring region, taking the assistance of space-based services for granted and exploiting its commercial potential. Still, the seed money comes from government sources and it is huge, but optimistic return calculations like those in the 2010 OECD study promise a good return of investment. The value factor is given here depending on the discipline you look at, from 1.4 to 4.9. That's a good argument. Compared to what the US invests into space through NASA, the European budgets are still small, but enough to keep ahead of competitors like Brazil, India and China. But the focus is on applied space services rather than exploratory ventures. If judged by its budget distribution, ESA is an Earth observation and navigation centered organization. Look at navigation and Earth observation taking the largest share of the budget. Human spaceflight is around 10% here, hopefully with stable tendency. Space exploration merely makes 10% of the expenditure. And there are more threats around that need immediate attention of spacefaring regions like Europe or help to prevent future catastrophes. Some weeks ago, the ISU annual symposium has been devoted to these threats. The threats are the solar terrestrial environment impacting on Earth and Earth technology, space debris, near-Earth objects, and threats to ground and space infrastructure, for example, by cyber attacks. An immense solar flare in January threatened communication and other space-based services worldwide, and it's really impressive. I hope this works as a... No, I can't launch the video, but you should have a look at what a solar flare can do, even to the detectors meant to detect solar flares. Debris has become another threat to space infrastructure, endangering crews of the International Space Station as well as expensive hardware. Though it hasn't happened yet, the idea of a large piece of deorbiting space junk hitting human settlements needs to be addressed convincingly. Last, not least, a responsible space program should not only be driven by the aspects of profit or preeminence, but should also take precaution against probable global threats seriously. Detecting near-Earth objects is the first step. Deflecting them may become necessary to prevent catastrophe. We can expect that the space situational awareness will become an eminently important space program. Human spaceflight and plans for space exploration should take this into account and try to identify spin-on potential and synergies as much as possible to profit from the attention given to these new challenges. Culture also means coping with the most eminent subjects for humans on Earth. We cannot assume that we can undertake research on ISS or Mars or human planetary exploration as an academic exercise, completely decoupled from the living conditions of a majority of humans on this planet. Pressing issues which are worrying industrialized and poor countries alike are the dangerous consequences of climate change. Here the possibility of monitoring the Earth's surface from a global perspective has put space-based Earth observation and disaster warning into a pole position to demonstrate the criticality of climate change and help to mitigate the consequences. And Mars plays a role in shedding light on these global and planetary developments. It is impressive to see that a single mission such as the Space Radar Topography mission in 2000 could provide data to draw a map of the world's water flows with unprecedented accuracy. One single mission. The current ISX Expedition 30 is one of the crews dedicating a lot of their outreach activity to the concept and awareness of the analogies between Earth and their spaceship ISS. The access to fresh water, closely connected to the improvement of health in less developed regions of the world. It is not by chance that subjects as the recycling of water, the production of oxygen, and other technologies for self-sustained existence are used and further researched on board of ISS and are vital for planetary exploration. Also, the analogies between the ailments of old age and the deconditioning of astronauts under microgrid conditions have found a lot of scientific interest. Efficient health analysis via telemedical services are useful in low Earth orbit and essential for life during exploration missions. Their application on the ground has long since been started with growing commercial potential. Energy conversion processes, alternate to combustion, are a key element of spaceflight. The process of moving away from fossil fuel has gained a new momentum with the events of last year. Together with the necessity to minimize energy consumption technology for space travel and trends on Earth point into the same direction. Energy needs to be distributed across large distance. Maps based on space data help to accomplish this major reorganization of the way the industrialized countries will assure their supply of energy. Fresh water, poor air, and food are essential for survival and quality of living on Earth. Preparing for exploration missions, space technology has to address these very same questions. The artificial world we create in our spaceships has already given us a lot of insight into the elementary conditions for life on Earth. So, as we can see, overpopulation is about the only major problem where space cannot offer help and support for solutions. All these examples serve to state that a space exploration program encompassing what we currently can do on ISS and going beyond into interplanetary space will fail to find sustained support if it does not also address some of the threats in space and the burning questions on Earth. It can do so by either finding an innovative technical solution or by mitigating the impact of these problems by applying space-based services and developments. It is also a cultural value to incorporate the view back to Earth into the efforts to look beyond our current horizon. Last not least, we come to the E in space, which in this context reads exploratio, exploration. We value exploration as an opportunity to discover, to learn, and ultimately to grow. We are convinced that humankind must embrace the challenge of peaceful human space exploration. We, the European astronauts, are willing to take the next step. It is very befitting that when you came into this lecture hall, you came across a bust of the very first space pioneer, the founder of our profession, Yuri Alexeyevich Gagarin. And it's the 12th of April, not to forget. I mean, what a historical date. The hall through which you passed is now named Hall of Space Explorers. We can be very thankful to ISU for this dedication. Exploration will only succeed when seen as a whole. Pioneers will follow robots and are themselves followed by scientists and people applying the knowledge gained. Discover, learn, and grow. This is making best use of European and worldwide traditions. Thank you for your attention. Sure.
If anyone has questions, there's some time for that. Your speech must have been very clear. I'm going to introduce to you now Dr. Bruno Gardini. Well, from the name you can already guess he's Italian. He studied in Torino at the Polytechnical Institute, where he graduated cum laude. And if you've seen after that what he's done for the European Space Agency and in a way for us space explorers, it is truly impressive. He first, after his studies, did a fellowship at ESTEC. Then he went to Friedrichshafen for a few years to work on the Ulysses project. But after that, if I name names, the big names in our space exploration of the European Space Agency, he was the project manager. SOHO, studying the sun, Envisat, Rosetta, Aurora. Aurora, of course, was one of the programs he worked at from the very beginning, 2001. It's the program that ESA envisions will bring us to Mars eventually, 20 years from now perhaps. It will also bring us to the moon, get us a lander there. I know he has been working on that recently. Today, he is Senior Advisor on Exploration at the European Space Agency, and with his distinguished career as he has had so far, I think he should be the advisor on this. With no further ado, I would like to introduce Bruno Gardini and invite him to speak, to give his speech.
Seems to work. Thank you, Artemis, for your kind words. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to be here today to talk about exploration. And when Chris asked me to make a presentation about challenge of human exploration and human mission to Mars, I said, well, if you like challenge, that's the place to go. It is obviously is a challenge, but it's also a tremendous undertaking. It's something which will mark a milestone in the history of human mankind, not only of space, not only space flight. And of course, if it would be easy, we just would not do that. So I think, yes, challenges are many of them, and I think that what makes this mission extremely interesting. Having said that, let's talk a little bit about the mission itself, and to see what are the technical the challenges which are coming with that, and how we can deal with that. It is, of course, a long-term mission. We are talking about a 3 years mission, and this is the kind of mission which has been considered. It is a conjunction mission with short transfer time and longer stays on the surface of Mars. There are other alternatives, of course, where the stay on the surface is relatively short, but I think at the end of the day, if you want to operate there and do something useful, this is the kind of mission that you have to consider. And the 3 years mission, which requires advanced technology and the solution to a number of technical, technological, medical, and also psychological problems which need to be looked at today. Just to give you a little bit of a summary of that, probably the first things that we need to solve in these are obviously only the top level one. First question that we have to solve is energy. How do we get that? We need a reliable and robust source of energy. A solar array, I'm afraid, will not work. We have even studied that in the past, but the dimensions are such that it's just not feasible anymore. And the answer to that, I believe, is only one. It has to be nuclear energy, which is, of course, an argument that in Europe is not very popular and is difficult and it is expensive. But it's also difficult. Another aspect, and NASA tried to started the development of this kind of energy source. We are talking a small reactor here. Was started a couple of times, then was stopped. And the problem there is a part of the political sensitivity of the argument is, of course, the investment that you have to put into this technology. We flew nuclear reactor in the past. But this was at the time of the Cold War. I don't think we would be allowed today to fly anything like that. The risk it was taken with this kind of technology, with the liquid metal as a cooling fluid. I don't think this would be something that we can reasonably consider today, especially if we have humans on board. So that is energy. Propulsion, that may be less of a problem. There's a lot of discussion about the cryogenic propulsion space, and of course you have the problem of boil-off and the rate of depletion of the cryogenic things will need to be solved. But that's probably not such a tremendous challenge. Having launcher, know that there are a lot of discussion in the US about a new launch system which would provide the capability maybe into step, the capability to assembly in low Earth orbit the spaceship which will go to Mars one day. And we are talking really big spaceship. I think for each element of that one, depend on the architecture of the mission, we are talking something like 400 tons. So compared to the space station, that is one of the elements that we would need to go. Man-rated design, that gets a little bit more complicated. Of course, we know how to do man-rated design. The entire ISS is like that. The Soyuz, other elements are man-rated. But we are talking about here a mission of 3 years with basically no possibility of repair. Of course, you can take a fair amount of spare parts on board. You can do some local repair, but it's not like the space station. If something goes wrong, you can have an emergency, you can have a backup solution, and then you can bring back the new spare parts, new big pieces to replace it. That means the man rating here, in terms of reliability, in terms of redundancy, in terms of component, it will require certainly a new dimension, a much more complex design in itself. Radiation environment and mitigation, that's probably the most difficult problem that we are having there. Radiation during such an interplanetary trip is a problem. The dosage which accumulate is extremely high, and we are talking about energetic, ionizing radiation, intergalactic cosmic ray, which are very difficult to shield. Normal shielding doesn't work very well. Actually, secondary radiation due to the structure of the atom can be even more dangerous than the original radiation. There has been some studies about that, for example, having with slowing down and taking away energy from the particle, typically with material which are rich in hydrogen. Since on the trip to Mars we will need a lot of water, that would be certainly the best candidate for that. And some design has been done, which is a kind of cocoon of a shield of water for a safe haven for the astronaut. And then, beside the water, of course, you can have conventional shielding. But whether that works and how many tons of water we need, I think this is still a question mark. There is another possibility, which is using magnetic shield, which in a sense reproduce a little bit what happens in the Earth to protect from energetic particle. And I will come back to that a little bit later on. But certainly this is one of the key and the most difficult problem that we have to solve today. Life support, then the next one. I mean, this is a very long trip. It's 3 years, and you have to bring with you food supply for the entire trip. And with some redundancy maybe on some extra dishes to entertain bored astronaut during long time of a long period where there is relatively little activity during the transfer phase, for example. Now, the first thing to that, of course, is to have a life support system on board which is close, almost 100% closure. It's a self-containing, requires recycling, waste treatment, water recycling, gas recycling, and so on. This may be complemented by some food production. Now, whether that replaced and to which extent let's say, the dry food that you have to bring with you is questionable. It probably complements that a little bit, will not replace that. And that is also an area where there is a lot of research is needed. Microgravity countermeasure, I mean, some original idea to have a rotating space station is still very attractive. Maybe centrifuge can do the job on a smaller scale. Another countermeasure will be there in terms of physical exercise. Medication as well, it can help. And this is, thank you. I think you need a bit more. Yes. So that's then the next step, and that brings us close to one of the other major problem of the mission, which is health. Health, telemedicine, but telemedicine is not the only thing. Of course, probably you will have one of the crew member will have to be a medical doctor, but before using telemedicine, before that one, I think the first question is, okay, you select healthy astronaut for the trip, and that is fine, and this is what is done today. The question is, you would like to be reasonably sure that they will stay healthy for the next 3 years, and not for 6 months, and not in a situation where in few days, in case of emergency, astronaut could be brought back to Earth for treatment, like it could be if something goes wrong on a moon mission. On a Mars mission, after 2-3 months, you have reached already the point of no return. So you cannot go back. You are dedicated, you are stuck with the 3 years mission, and you have to stay healthy for 3 years. So in terms of medical diagnostic, this is another interesting aspect we need to be taken care of. Psychological aspect, that's also a very interesting part of that. We had some discussion at the beginning of the Aurora program with some of the astronauts, and we asked them, in such a trip, what do you think would be the most difficult aspect to cope with, and from a psychological point of view? And of course, the answer was, first of all, to keep busy. Because it's a very long trip, you have to prepare to do something and to cope with a situation where delay in communication, the contact with Earth become more difficult. But what was very interesting almost all of them, they told us, the most difficult part will be the fact that we will not see Earth anymore. After a very short time, the Earth has disappeared from the horizon. And he said, from the space station, if you look outside of the windows, I mean, now we have this beautiful cupola, but this was a few years ago, the cupola was not there. And he said, you look out of the window, you see the Earth, and you said, that is home. We will go back home one day. And on a trip to Mars, that vision will disappear very, very quickly. So that is also something to be taken into account. There are other psychological aspects, and something can be done with that. I think you are all familiar with the Mars 500 experiment, and I understand tomorrow there will be a first-hand presentation of the results of that, so certainly we'll have the possibility to discuss this aspect more in detail. Certainly is a very interesting aspect of that. Having said that, we have discussed all these aspects. This is all technology, is capability that we need to resolve, problem that we have to settle, and so on. But then when you put all that together, then the question is, how do we get there? I mean, how do we get to a situation where, having solved all these problems, we can put all this capability together and get ready, go to Mars? That's not such an obvious thing. Of course, everybody would like that we start a mission and we go on. I think there are many more intermediate steps, and I think it is a long way. Long time ago, when we started the Aurora exploration program, and we all were much younger than we are today, we looked at that combination and we said, what are the logical steps to do? And the logical step, of course, you will have technology development, you have ground test and whatever it is. But then I think the first step is the ISS. Is the place which comes close to simulate a space environment of a trip to Mars. Not quite, but certainly is one of the best representation, the best place we have to test and to develop our technology. The next point would be the Moon. Again, this is in terms of cost, in terms of validation, this is the place where you want to go to basically rehearsal the entire Mars mission. Again, not quite, because it's not the same. It's not the same things. The gravity is not the same, and the trip is not the same. But still, it's the best probably representation you can have. And then after that, well, I think that we will need a number of robotic missions before we go to human. And this is kind of a parallel line there. We had ExoMars, is a mission which had some trouble in the last time, but I believe today is in a fairly stable condition, and thanks God to a new agreement and new cooperation with the Russian partners. I think the next real big step is the Mars sample return. Will not be this decade, probably the next one, and let's not forget that the economic conditions are not the best for this enterprise, but that is the big milestone which will bring us close to a human mission to Mars. In the following slide, I would just give you some example of the activity that we have implemented in Europe, and which concern and which have an impact or are of interest for the preparation of a human mission to Mars. And we start first with the life support system. Life support system, in that one, this is a technology which has been developed already since several years. We have a working breadboard, and is quite an important application, because if you look at the consequences of that, has quite an impact, and it is an impact which is already important now for the space station. It would be even more important for a very long trip like Mars. One thing also we have to take into account is, of course, into this approach, we have methane production into this process, which would be vented outside in the present application. But methane is an important component for propulsion. It would have certainly another application, and quite important one. Now, The next step would be, of course, coming from the breadboard to a flight hardware development to an operational system, which is not only flight hardware, it means also in terms of reliability and application, quite an important step. And this is where I am afraid the money question will come in. We had that on our drawing board for quite some time, and there is still a chance that at the next ministerial this activity could be approved, but is by no way secure today. So we will have to see and how it is. But that it would be a very important step, not only, of course, for Mars exploration, but even immediately now for application to the space station. If you look a little bit more farther into the future and we think about a more advanced life support system with the food provision, with food production, a completely closed loop system, this is an experiment which started already quite some time ago. I think the Melissa program is started more than 10 years ago with national participation from national agencies. I think the main participation is Spain, Belgium, and Canada. And what we have, this is the major part of this program is now the Melissa pilot plant in Barcelona, which has been inaugurated in June 2009. And where the work is progressing very well. Is a program which has contribution from many sides, from all sorts of programs, including the human space flight, of course, and require a lot of coordination. But has been so far quite successful. There is and in the present planning, I believe that the aim is to have a completely closed-loop system by 2017, something like that, if everything according to plan, and financing is available, of course. One interesting part is maybe this one. The crew is not there yet. We don't have astronauts. But what we have is a tribe of rats, 24 of them. And the reason I have been told is about 24 rats consume about the same amount of oxygen as one astronaut. That seems to be the criteria. And certainly we will need quite more work before we can ask some people to volunteer to become part of the experiment. But again, I think is a very interesting program, and is a program which has a lot of a spin-off for ground application, from agricultural application. So it's not only the importance of that is not only for space. It is quite, in fact, quite an interesting approach, because you characterize the food production in terms of global energy. So you might have a very nice, very high plant which has a very high productivity, but then the waste, it takes a lot of energy to destroy. That is no good. And this is really a different way to look at food. It also has to taste a little bit nice, otherwise astronaut might complain, but that is a secondary thing, of course. So it is a lot of activity. It's quite an interesting approach. It's a little bit outside the traditional space technology, but is exactly where we came to a joint kind area of interest between the space technology and human factor for a future mission. Radiation protection. I mentioned to you before the possibility of using water to provide a safe haven for the astronaut. Another interesting thing is, of course, the use of magnetic field, not to absorb particles but to deviate them. And we had quite an interesting discussion at the time of the alpha magnetic spectrometer. You know that the original design was foreseen to have a cryogenic magnet, which later on it was replaced by permanent magnet. And the reason is the cryogenic design requires quite a lot of cooling fluid, which has a boil-off rate and therefore has a limited life, while permanent magnets are less effective. The magnetic field is not as strong as in the original design, but it lasts very long. So from a scientific point of view, to have a very long mission, and particularly with the ISS lifetime extended to 2020, the decision was taken to go to a permanent magnet. But the technology which has been developed is extremely useful. And we are running now a study with Professor Battistone, which is part of Samuel's original team for AMS, to see whether this design can be used to create an area, a protected area, where astronaut can work, or at least can take refuge during, for example, a very high solar flare or event which can become very dangerous for the health of astronaut. It is not obvious that this is going to work. You need the magnetic field, the strength, which is very, very high. You need a big volume, and you need and to create that is not such an easy thing. It looks promising. We are not there yet, so we will have to see whether that is something which is can have an application for the future. But it would be an alternative to solve the problem of radiation. Maybe a combination of the two, but in terms of engineering, in terms of design, you can imagine that the whole thing gets very, very complicated. Another way to demonstrate, to validate the technology that we have developed and we have been talking so far, are analog places. The Antarctica station, I think some of you or most of you are probably familiar with that, has been used also where it is an international endeavor, I think with quite a strong Italian participation. ESA has participated to that. We have supplied particularly water treatment units for that one, and I think you also are aware that, and it's because of the isolation and the real difficulty to reach it, it's also a place where telemedicine has played a great role. You also might remember personal difficulties of one of the staff in the Concordia station, which got sick and it could not be brought back in short time. So it is unfortunately, but okay, is also exactly the reproducing situation which can occur in a human mission to Mars, and that we should not forget. That is, human life is the primary requirement for that. Mars 500 isolation facility, as I said before, you will get some feedback on that today, and so I think first-hand experience, and I will leave it to them to present the result of this one. Maybe one thing I would like to mention is that there are. It was a very successful experiment. There are discussions now to repeat it. Either like that, maybe shorter duration, I don't know, in the same situation, but on the International Space Station. Whether that become a reality, I do not know. But I think it would be a very interesting situation, because you repeat the same experience without gravity. So that will add to the fun of the whole experiment. It will probably make it also a little bit harder than it has been so far. I think this is a quite important idea, quite important experiment for the near future. Other terrestrial analog, that there are many of these activities which have taken place over the last year, organized by NASA as well. I just want to mention that, which is rather recent event, which was organized by the Austrian Space Forum, together with the Centro of Astrobiology in Madrid, and with the support of ESA. And I think it was a quite interesting experience. It turned out, in fact, to be interesting not only for the location. If you have seen some picture of Rio Tinto, it looks really like a Mars landscape, but it was also a little bit disturbed by, it was in April, and we had heavy rain, so the whole experiment was flooded, which is not supposed to happen on Mars, but these kind of things you cannot predict so easily. And I think it was interesting for various aspects. I just would like to mention here something. It was a possibility to verify the teleoperation, telepresence, compare with human-assisted operation of, you have seen the rover before, which has been developed by under one of our program. And also the other aspect which are important is the monitoring of the health and the performance of the astronaut. So one of the astronauts was a set of instrumentation which was monitoring the health and giving continuous monitoring to the remote station while he was trying to operate the rover and doing some work on the field to see how the body reacts to this condition. It had if you look at that, he had a kind of spacesuit which is not quite EVA kind of suit, but I think it was heavy enough and uncomfortable enough to provide some good test results. Then it comes the ISS. And of course, for Europe, allow me to present not the entire ISS, but the Columbus Laboratory, which is of course, our contribution, one of our contributions. And this is the next place where I believe we should go for validation of the technology in preparation for exploration in general, but certainly on the long term is human mission to Mars, which remains in the background of all our thought when we talk about exploration. That's what we really mean at the end. So to do that, we had a call for idea which was issued in October 2010. By the end of the year, we had received 180 plus proposals. Some of them extremely interested, and these have been classified in area of interest. I will give you some example of that, because the idea which came out of that were extremely valuable. Some of them were completely crazy, but most of them they were absolutely of a first class idea. I have to mention here some activity may be proposed for approval at the CM 2012, as it was mentioned before. We have this ministerial conference, ministerial council coming up end of November, and some of these ideas we intend to propose. Now, the problem, of course, is money. It will be difficult, so I cannot, very difficult to predict today how many of these ideas will really get financial support and will be implemented. But this is what we intend to do, and we will see how the things are going. This is just a list, if you want, of some of the ideas which have been presented. I think it is quite obvious that the major area of interest was astronauts. Astronaut health, countermeasure for weightless, psychological support, as I mentioned before, health studies and monitoring is a lot of idea that has been proposed by that. Radiation, detection, shielding effect, those measurements to characterize the environment on the space station. We have already experiment running since quite a few years. Now the problem there is the radiation environment on the space station is not comparable in reality to the environment you would expect on Mars, on the surface of Mars, or even on the surface of the Moon. But at least it's the first step and the first part that we can do, the first program. And there is one thing that we would like to do is to go to the next step, to measure the dosage of radiation, to characterize the radiation environment. Of course, is the first step, is the most important one, but equally important is to quantify the effect of radiation on the DNA and possibly from human cell, and to see how the repair mechanism work and what is the ultimate effect of that one. It is clear that, as I said before, radiation is an issue, and years ago we had a joint study with the Russian on this aspect, and it was a little bit funny feeling when the result came out, and they said the best candidate for a mission to Mars is an astronaut around 56 years old. Now that's too young for me, but and it's simply a statistics. Is a statistics evaluation. It's not very nice. I think we have to improve and allow a situation where also younger astronauts can go to Mars and come back. So that's certainly an area where a lot of work still has to be done. Life support system, I think, quite obvious, is the second group of that, and then failure management and repair was the third one. That is a little bit more difficult. You can, of course, think about things going wrong, being able to repair, having the tools, having spare parts, and so on. In reality, what you can do, I am afraid, is rather limited. It's not the place when you can have all the capability, industrial capability, to build, to repair things. But I think it's worthwhile to think about that, to see what you can do, because on a mission to Mars, if you want to bring all the spare parts, that's become impossible. Then, human mission to the moon, still to come. We have been there already in the past, of course, and there are quite interesting activity on that. Most activity are robotics. Moon has become again a very interesting place in the last years. I think certainly we should mention the Chinese program, which is a very ambitious program for moon exploration. Low Earth orbit first, but I think they will reach that pretty fast. I think they are planning to have a first experiment with the docking to a station module before the end of the year. So we will have to see on the long time, on the long term, is something, of course, which is it is feasible. It can be done, but okay, in the present economic condition, it might be difficult both for US and Europe to consider that in the short term. And we are preparing for that. As it was mentioned before, we have a lunar lander project going on in the agency, which is a relatively small spacecraft landing at the South Pole. But this is as far as we could propose today. Of course, we would like to do much more ambitious things, but we will have to see how the things evolve in NASA, in the US, and to see how we can become partner in this endeavor. I think for the moment is where we are. But on the other hand, this, as I mentioned before, is the ground where you can prove the technology, you can prove the capability, the logistics of the whole things, redundancy, design. You have dust on Mars, you have dust on the Moon, not quite the same, different characteristic, but both of them rather annoying, both for humans and for a mechanical system, mechanical device everywhere. So I think it is very important that this capability that we intend to develop for Mars are tested first and extensively on the Moon before we can trust to put people on board and send them to Mars. Economically is, of course, much easier. The Moon is closer, it costs less, still expensive, but much less than going to Mars. And I think this is an important aspect that we would expect to develop sometimes in the future. Concerning the robotic exploration part of Mars, I would like to mention ExoMars here. I think, I hope that the situation on this mission will stabilize. It has made very good progress. There was a good agreement which was signed between Jean-Jacques Dordain and the head of Roscosmos Agency last Friday. And I think this will be the basis for making this very important and very interesting mission on a solid basis for the future. But the next most important step, as I mentioned before, is Mars Sample Return. This is the first robotic mission where all the elements of a human mission to Mars are there. Scale down, less redundancy, but this is what we have to do. We have the Earth to Mars transfer stage, Mars orbit, descent module, ascent vehicle, Earth re-entry vehicle. And the technology that we there is, in terms of landing, in terms of ascent, is the kind of technology that we need to develop for the human mission. On a bigger scale, of course, and with higher safety margin, whatever you want. But these are the first element. Of course, then there are scientific tasks which are typical of the mission, and which you should not neglect that. This is the Mars Sample Return, probably not in this decade, I hope in the next decade, is the great milestone which will bring us closer to Mars. And is not a big mission compared to a human mission, but it's still a very complex and a very expensive mission. Some estimate we had in the past, we were talking a mission about 5-6 billion, and that's already difficult to collect in the moment. There is a mission also which is of quite complexity, and is a mission which has been on the drawing board for, I would say, decades. The problem is that some of the early studies, they were probably too early, and before it took quite a long time before we managed to put together a technical concept which it would make sense. A technical concept, you look at that, is that yes, it is feasible. I think we did quite some work in 2007 together with the JPL and NASA, and these are things you can still find on the website, and this is just a sketch of the first leg of the mission, and this is the second one. Okay, I will not go into the details of that, but I think what we have today, particularly with the MSL mission, the Sky Crane landing system, which hopefully will be demonstrated in few months' time, successfully demonstrated, I think that is probably the breakthrough that we needed to make this mission feasible. That's probably the most critical part of the mission. It requires a guided entrance in the early phase of the atmospheric flight on Mars, and the accuracy you get with that one is probably getting close to what we need for a Mars Sample Return. Actually, JPL was already doing some further studies and development. The accuracy, the landing accuracy of MSL, I think, is around 10 kilometers or something like that. With a relatively small modification, it could be brought down to 2-3 kilometer landing accuracy, and this is what we consider necessary for the implementation of the mission. The next chart, I bring it here because it concerns system studies, a system trade-off for the Mars Sample Return, but it's quite interesting because most of these will apply to a human mission to Mars as well. And one of them, for example, is this picture there. We will need, if we go to Mars on a human exploration, we will need several elements. We need to land infrastructure first on Mars before we send the astronaut. Infrastructure may be mobility, it might be return vehicle, return stage, probably two of them, not only one, and all kind of things, energy supply, to be prepared, to be ready for receiving the astronaut. And then so you have several elements. They have to be landed in whatever terrain. We will probably choose the easiest one, of course, but in a close proximity to each other. So you need landing accuracy. But how much you need to be accuracy, and this is the first trade-off between lower landing accuracy, but then you have higher, for mobility, you need higher range of the rover, higher range of mobility. And that's the example we have here. You have MSL as was taken as a reference in that time. So if the accuracy is poor, then you need a rover which can travel much longer, faster I don't know, but on a longer distance. If you have a higher landing accuracy to the spot or wherever you want to land, 2 or 3 spots, then of course you can have a rover which is less capability and smaller capability. Of course, we took ExoMars at that time as a reference. Probably for a human mission you would need nuclear power anyway, but of a different size and different complexity. And then, well, another interesting example is, of course, this is something still not completely resolved, is for the Mars ascent vehicle. We had a long discussion between solid, liquid propulsion, whatever solution we have. One of the main requirements will be, of course, reliability. It has to be safe. It has to be reliable. It has to be robust during landing, because you get a little bit of a shock, and that's of course never good. And this is something which will be interesting to see when it comes to a human-rated kind of ascent vehicle. What is the best solution? I don't think we have an answer today, but okay, it is one of the many questions which need to be answered. Conclusion: human mission to Mars? Yes. I think that is the future, and this is where we have to aim for. Of course, might not be tomorrow. It will take a little bit of time. You know that for a while, 2036 was considered the magic year, and from very high political level, the year to go to Mars. Well, I think it will take a little bit longer than that, but I think that is not too important. I think we will go there one day. But what I would like to conclude is that, okay, we have talked about technology, enabling capability, human factor. I think we should not forget that there are other factors which are maybe less technical, but even more important. Organization, logistic. How do we put together such a huge spaceship to Mars? 2 or 3 of them, probably, not only one. And financing is, of course, the question. But maybe most important is international cooperation. The size of the mission is such that I think we require the cooperation of all the spacefaring nations of Earth. And I think this is an important goal, an important result, which I wouldn't say almost equivalent to the fact that you are landing on Mars. The fact that you have been able to do that in cooperation with many, many countries and many, many agencies. I think this is a very important result that it will come out of this mission. I think it's something that I would like to leave that as a conclusion of my presentation, because I believe is an aspect which is equally important for the progress of mankind. Thank you for your attention.
Testing. There we go. Dr. Gardini, Sam Shmimi, Space Station Program Office at headquarters. Could you give us your thoughts about using the Space Station Partnership as the basis for international cooperation?
Yes, indeed. I think this is a very important question, but I would delegate the question to André Farand, who is sitting there. I think he will... first, he's a lawyer, so he's better qualified. He's better qualified to answer the question. I think he has a presentation today or tomorrow on that subject. I think the partnership on the ISS, I think, has been sometimes not always easy, but I think has been a robust, it's a very important cooperation. I think it's a scheme which has been fruitful, has been resilient for many years. Certainly is a very important aspect to consider. But maybe, André, you You want to comment on that? Tomorrow? Okay.
Hi there, my name's Ben. I'm an ISU master's student. I actually have a question for you from someone who's participating through a web link. And he asks a question, the first manned missions to Mars, do you think they'll be launched from the lunar surface or directly from low Earth orbit?
I don't think to go to the lunar surface is a practical proposal, because in terms of energy you have to land and restart. So I think the concept which is considered today is to have an assembly of the spaceship to Mars in low Earth orbit and then go directly toward Mars. Assembling low Earth orbit is something we know to do. The ISS is the best example of that. I think we have all the experience, and in terms of energy is the best way to go there.
I can get Robert Feldhausen. I have actually a related question to the previous question. You clearly said just a minute ago, assembling in low Earth orbit is the way to go to Mars. Would, in your opinion, would require that a space station type infrastructure in low Earth orbit? Or?
I think the spaceship which is going to Mars, and probably we will need 2 or even 3 of them. One for human and one for the cargo, one to bring the infrastructure on the ground to Mars, the return stage. You would prepare that very well in advance before you send the human. So I think you will need 2 or 3 of these spaceships, and each one of them is around 400 tons. This comes, if you look at the NASA assessment of that one, which is basically one space station. So I think this is what we need for that. Now, I don't think we need, let's say, an infrastructure to build these spaceship, dedicated infrastructure to support. I believe it can be done the same way we assembled the space station, and then we go. But maybe some future evaluation with that in few years to come will show that we will need some support, tug kind of transport, these kind of things. I would not exclude that. But in principle, we have done for the ISS. I think we can do it for the rest.
Mikhail Marov, Russian Academy of Sciences. Some crude estimates for the future human mission to Mars. We need to assemble a sort of the several original pieces in order just to accomplish something like 500 tons. What kind of the constraints you would place for the future heavy launchers?
That's a good question. I think it is clear that for that kind of assembly, 400, 500 tons, that's the kind of order of magnitude we are talking about. We cannot afford to do hundreds of launches to bring out bits and pieces. The size of the pieces has to be big enough to make sense to have that kind of things. So, and that's why I think what we are talking now in the US, maybe our NASA colleague can comment on that. We are talking about 180 tons, something like a couple of 100 ton capability to low Earth orbit. I believe that less than that would become more and more feasible, less efficient and much more costly. So I think to have a heavy launcher, I mean, that was an RS-5 kind of concept in the past. This, I think, what we need. Without that, I don't think the mission would be feasible. Yes, we have 2 questions.
Can I ask?
Yes, please.
Oh, hello. I'm a visionary and a journalist and a writer, and I spent 15 years in Japan, and now I live in Berlin after Fukushima. I have a general question. In Japan at conferences you can ask anything you like, and in Germany there is censorship. There's many things you can't ask. So I wanted to ask, are all sorts of questions are allowed at this conference, or is it anything you don't want people to ask? And I want an honest answer, because it's, you know, I'm a writer. I'm writing book Vision for Aerospace Industry, and I ask lots of questions.
No, I think as personally I am concerned, you can ask any question.
Okay.
The question will be if I will be able to answer.
No, that's okay. That sounds good, you know.
That's another story.
I hope Germany learns from France. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll think of my questions.
So there's another question here.
Okay, I won't bother you anymore. We had one exploration program, a little one called Apollo, that ended prematurely. How do you think going to Mars will be an Apollo-esque kind of adventure, or do you think it'll be a more sustained endeavor where we go to Mars over multiple decades, not just a one-shot mission? Or should we approach it as Apollo and do it as a, hey, we planted a whole bunch of flags on Mars in one mission and then end it?
Now, this is a question. I believe at the end we will need a sustainable program. I don't think it would make sense to have such an investment, go there once and then forget the old things. I think this is something which has to be considered, and of course has to be planned in advance, and will of course require a certain political willingness to go that way, because it's a very long-term investment. But I think that's the right thing to do. However, if you think about the first mission that will go to Mars, if that first mission would be an Apollo time and would be as successful as Apollo, as an engineer, I would be perfectly happy. Mark.
Hi, Bruno. A question, we just mentioned Apollo. Do you think there's less incentive to take risks? Everybody talks about Apollo. It was very, short time frame. And people say to me, if we did it today, we'd never have done Apollo because of the risks taken.
I'm not so sure I can answer that question. It is, of course, is an aspect which is extremely important. It was a different time. I think during those years, both US and I think also Russian, they took risks which are probably today much more difficult to sell to the public, but I think also in general we would have to be more careful. But the other thing is that the element of risk for a human mission to Mars, I think, is much higher than a human mission to the moon. Okay, difficult to compare. I mean, Apollo was a long time ago, and the technology today is different. Progress has been made, whatever you want. But on the other hand, I think if you think about radiation, I think if you think about health, the fact that you cannot come back quickly from Mars, I think these are new elements which need to be taken into consideration. And as I said, human life at the end is what is most important. So I believe for this mission we would need a level of safety, of redundancy, reliability, whatever, which is comparably higher, because the mission is more complex, is more risk, is longer, and requires that.
Dr. Gardini, I have a quick question, but probably a long answer. When you spoke about the challenges that we faced going to Mars, you presented a fairly good list of the things that we need to accomplish, and then you spoke about your vision of the realistic time that we might accomplish that as after 1936 sometime. Is that assessment paced by what you believe it will take to meet those technical challenges, or is that assessment really one of what it will take to pull together the resources to make that happen? And if it is the technical challenges, which ones are the ones that you think have that long a solution time?
Yes. I think it's a combination of all factors, because we have some technologies there. Radiation certainly is the first one, but the medical aspect as well, which I think it will take quite a long time before we come to a solution. The other aspect is, of course, financial and organizational. Before we get everybody together and having an agreement that this is the way to go, I think it will take probably even longer time. And it all depends, of course, on the economic situation. We need some improvement before we can propose this kind of mission with the level of expenditure that you can expect for that. So the year I cannot answer, no.
Would, if you were to undertake an international mission to Mars such as this, what would you take away from the ISS program in terms of success in international cooperation, and what would you change? You know, what worked and what didn't work?
On the ISS, I think sometimes I hear from my older colleagues that the interface was not always easy. Technically and programmatic, I think there has been, in some occasion, there has been a lot of discussion. And I heard very often, he said, this is the area where we would need improvement. I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure that this is the correct analysis. It's a complex, the ISS is a complex undertaking with many partners, with different cultures which meet together there. And I think discussion of interface, you have that on every spacecraft, on every project, and it takes a lot of time, a lot of attention. At the end, there is a technical solution. What sometimes I have seen that there is a lot of time and energy which is wasted because there are two interface means to party, each one blaming each other for what might go wrong or what has gone wrong. I think that maybe is an improvement, but not so sure. It's part of the human nature. I mean, from my very first project, we had to define a certain standard for the electrical interface of that and the signal. Now, these were a lot of discussion, 1553, other bus, other, because it takes enormous discussion. At the end, okay, the solution was there, we found it worked. I think this is where maybe things can be improved, but it's not a major, I think it's not a major deal. I think there will be a lot of discussion. I think a lot of work for the lawyers, they will be quite happy with that. To draft all these international agreements, but I think this is part of life.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah. Okay, as a person born in Rotterdam, raised there, I seem to take in from this last question that we should talk less, do more. As that is the anthem of the, if that's the word, of the soccer club in Rotterdam. I can relate to that. Deeds, no words. The next deed you can do here is go for your coffee and tea break. You have a nice long pause until 11:30, but I really expect every one of you on time back. So we'll have a nice time for lunch as well. And, you know, enjoy your tea, coffee, and these little local French pastries that will go with it.